She has been one of the leaders nationally on helping us think through the complexities of food issues. You know, when we might say, you know, the food in our schools is just substandard, and we don't think our children should be eating it. Janet dives into a subject like that as a sociologist and really tries to understand what's going on, what the issues are, what the problems are, and to come up with practical solutions. She has a tremendous set of books. Red Lines, Knee Deep in Wheat was her first book. Sweet Charity, her second book about the food banking system in the United States. And her third book, Free for All, Fixing School Food in America. That's this book here. I've read it cover to cover. It's completely unreadable now because I have marked it up so much. It's one big mess, but this is a great story about what's going on with respect to school food in the United States. When she's not writing books, she's a policy director at the New York City Food Policy Center at Hunter College. This book, School Food, won the 2010 Book of the Year Award from the Association for the Study of Food and Society. And in 2011, she was the recipient of the James Beard Foundation Leadership Award. So in addition, when we asked all of our speakers if they'd share a little something about their food preferences, in addition to having a distinguished teaching and writing career, Dr. Poppendieck admits to having a major sweet tooth, acknowledging that her favorite food group is pie, especially cherry pie. It's my privilege to introduce Jan Poppendieck.
You left out the broccoli, Rob.
I'm really grateful to you for allowing me to participate in this milestone in your journey toward the Santa Fe food that you want and need and desire for your community. I think it's a remarkable thing that you've done. I had a chance to see an advanced copy of the food plan, and I'm very impressed. So I first want to say congratulations, and I wonder if I could see the hands of anyone who's here who helped in actually drafting this. Who took on that difficult task? Okay, and other people who contributed in some way to the production of this document? Who were interviewed for it, for instance? Okay, good. Well, as I say, I think you've done a remarkable thing. I had playtime today, and my husband and I drove up through the northern parts of this county and on into the neighboring county, and went up took the high road to Taos, and went to Taos Pueblo. And this field trip has, I think, helped me to understand a little bit of what you mean by querencia, about your attachment to this area, to this land. The trees that are bright gold in among the dark. I mean, visually, this is one of the most beautiful places I have ever visited. And while we were at Taos Pueblo, and I do understand that that's a different county, but nonetheless, I think it shares some of the same history and values, we talked with an artist there, a Native American artist who had studied at Harvard, and while he was in Boston, and Mark, I know, spent many years in Connecticut, and I too studied in the Boston area, so it's a place I'm fond of, but he said he became sad because the combination of long gray stretches with none of your beautiful bright sunlight and short vistas, the lack of the great dome of sky and the long vistas that are part of life here made him sad, and he came back and delved into fine arts here. And so from what I saw and what I heard, I think I understand that this really is a special place. However, the food revolution that you are part of is not only happening here, it's happening around the globe and in many parts of the United States. And actually, it's part of a larger what's sometimes called the metropolitan revolution, but a larger reassertion of the importance of local. Academics have noticed this, and so there have been a bunch of books, and since I'm a recovering academic, I just have to mention one or two. Perhaps one of the most interesting is called The Metropolitan Revolution, How Cities and Metros Are Fixing Our Broken Politics and Fragile Economy, by Bruce Katz and Jennifer Bradley. And I have one tiny quote to read because I think it speaks to the situation in which our search for local food system solutions is embedded. Like all great revolutions, this one has been catalyzed by a revelation. Cities and metropolitan areas are on their own. The cavalry is not coming. Mired in partisan division and rancor, the federal government appears incapable of taking bold action to restructure our economy and grapple with changing demography and rising inequality. Now, obviously, if the book's out now, they wrote that before the most recent episode of federal dysfunction. And I want to say that this rise of municipalities as crucial actors is not just happening in the U.S. In fact, in a recent New York Times op-ed, an observer talked about the possibility of the end of nation states. He quotes Mayor Bloomberg, that's the mayor of my city. I don't listen to Washington much, he says, but says the observer that Washington is listening to mayors because mayors are the ones who are getting out there and acting. Bloomberg again, we're the level of government closest to the majority of the world's people. While nations talk, but too often drag their heels, cities act. And then Benjamin Barber, another observer, goes on to quote New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, who said, there is no democratic or Republican way of fixing a sewer. So local community governments tend to be less mired in the partisan politics that seems to be destroying so much of our activity. When devolution became a watchword, devolution meaning returning or dispersing decision-making authority to lower levels of government, when it became a watchword starting really in the 1980s, many people like myself with a progressive set of commitments were quite anxious because in our experience the federal government had been the government that was the guarantor of rights of marginalized, disenfranchised, oppressed people within our society. It had been an alliance between the civil rights movement and federal government actors that brought the change that was so long overdue. So we were a little worried about returning decision-making authority to states and localities. But even then, in the midst of our anxiety, there were voices, perhaps visionary, saying that place is important, that local is valuable, that people need to have more power, more decision-making where they live. And it's not just about mayors, but about democracy, about people getting involved and asserting their rights. And you can assert your rights tonight with the sticky, which is so important to get people engaged in this. I believe that the local food revolution, or maybe overusing that word, but that the tremendous growth in appreciation of the superiority of local food, of fresh food, food that fits into your ecosystem, is part of what has fueled this broader metropolitan revolution, but that the metropolitan revolution in turn will make it more possible to achieve the goals of the Santa Fe Food Plan. Santa Fe has been a major contributor to the local food revolution. Mark's work, I think of Mark as the Johnny Appleseed of food policy councils. He goes around the country and he helps people see a way to organize. He's helping us in New York. It's very hard in New York. We think that's because New York is so large, 8 million people, zillions of organizations that would need to cooperate, but I think it's actually challenging everywhere. And those of you who've been building the Food Policy Council activity here should again congratulate yourself. Santa Fe is also led with the pioneering work of Farm to Table, and Cooking with Kids, which is how I happen to be here tonight. When I was doing the research for Free for All, I came to Santa Fe and I interviewed a lot of people, but I went to a school to see Cooking with Kids in action. And actually, Anna Ferrier, whose lesson I observed, is here tonight. They made pizza margarita, and it was a terrific experience for the kids, and it was a terrific experience for me. And I have to tell you that I talk about it everywhere I go, to talk about the revolution or the movement to improve school food. The plan, I think you already know, probably. Some of you have reviewed it. You saw the boards on the way in, but it has the three major sections about getting food, learning about food, and growing food. And roughly these correlate with some of the biggest challenges facing people in America if they want to become healthy eaters and if we want access to good food for all. Getting food addresses those access issues, or how are people going to eat well if their income is completely inadequate? Learning about food addresses the issues that the councilwoman was mentioning in terms of knowing what's healthy. And growing food, of course, addresses the issues related to the conservation of our land and our water and the ways in which our food system is, in many parts of the country, destroying itself. When we look at these from the problem side, it's very daunting, okay? It really sets in, for many people, a kind of paralysis, at which point they decide to have another Snickers bar and watch more TV. But when you think about it from the growing movement side, you suddenly see that if we bring all of these concerns together, we have the potential for a critical mass. We have enough of the nation's most committed people caring and acting and working to make a real difference. I know that this was not easy, and I know it because of what's been going on in my own hometown in New York. During this summer, we have a mayoral election coming up in New York, and during the summer, food activists in New York decided to have a mayoral candidates forum on food policy. And we got together, and there were 12 co-hosts for this event, organizations across the food landscape. And we worked very hard, and we put on a fabulous event which exceeded our expectations. Not only were there 700 people in the auditorium and the 2 overflow rooms, but there were 1,300 people watching the live streaming. So we were thrilled. We got mentioned. Michael Pollan mentioned us. For most foodies, that's a bit of a thrill. And we left feeling empowered, and we said, okay, we're going to write a list of demands that we're going to present to the mayoral candidates after the preliminaries, the primaries, after we sifted down to know who was actually running. And when we sat down to create this list of demands, which was a much simpler, smaller task than creating a food plan, we ran into one obstacle after another that had to do with our lack of a history of cooperating with each other. So, frankly, my center couldn't sign on, if you call it, demands, because it was inappropriate for an academic research center to have demands. So they changed it to a primer. But then the National Resources Defense Council couldn't sign on to one section because it was too far out their mission, and City Harvest couldn't sign on to a thing we had about the tipped minimum wage. City Harvest is our food depot, our prepared food rescue program, and it goes on and on. We did it, okay? We hung in there. It wasn't fun, okay? And so, again, my congratulations to those of you who brought this document to the point where you can now go out in the community and put it through another round of, as Mark said, some complaint. Democracy is hard work. I certainly don't see my role here tonight as assessing your food plan. I think it's a remarkable document, but I did think that since I'm the author of Free for All, Fixing School Food in America, that I ought to get a few minutes to make my case for something that isn't in your food plan, and that I hope maybe you'll think about, and that is moving to a system of universal free school meals. Feeding all children as a regular part of the school day, not dividing children up on the basis of their ability to pay. And when I wrote Free for All, which ends with a impassioned and I hope compelling argument for moving to universal free, we were in the deepest part of the Great Recession, and many municipalities were broke, and state had reached their lending or spent their borrowing limits. So I argued for a federal, for doing this with federal dollars. But I have to tell you that last week on the steps of City Hall in New York City, we launched a campaign for universal free school meals in New York City with local funding. And they, in addition to kind of the usual suspects there to help announce this, the pediatricians were there. They had a spokesperson. The food bank was there. The teachers union was there. The council of school supervisors and administrators, basically the principals union, was there. The cafeteria workers, oddly enough, were not there, but we can show that every 10% increase in lunch participation in New York would generate 500 new jobs. So we expect to have them at our next. The Democratic candidate for public advocate was there and said she had discussed it with the current public advocate, who is the Democratic candidate for mayor, and that she knows he will support it. So I think it has a serious chance of success. And sometimes it's fun to be from New York, and one of the times is, if we can do it in New York, I think communities around the country will take a look and see if it really does work as much better as I argue that it will in the book. So I urge you here in Santa Fe to dream a little bit about what would be possible if all your kids had a school lunch as a regular part of the school day, integrated with the curriculum, hopefully shared with teachers as engaging adults in not just monitoring cafeteria behavior, but engaging with the kids. It would enhance the opportunities for food education and build on the fabulous work that Cooking with Kids has done. I really like it when I have a big clock in the back of the room, and there's not a big clock. How am I doing? Okay, then I'm going to skip a little bit and just move on to say, we can't do this. We won't be able to do universal free school meals in New York or anywhere else, or any of the other dramatic and important changes we need to make if we lose the federal funding stream that supports us. Last year, New Mexico took in $885 million. Pardon me, 972 million in federal funds for just food assistance programs. Okay, you can't afford to do without that. So even while you are focusing on the local, your food citizenship can't stop at the county line. But you have friends in high places, okay? New Mexico has a representative on the House Agriculture Committee, and you have one of your senators serves on the subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee that deals with agriculture. You have clout, and so I'm really wanting to urge you, while you are focusing on making food better in Santa Fe, to also remember that you need to be a very clear voice in Washington for preserving the federal investment which has made this possible. I think you probably all know that on November 1st, all SNAP recipients, SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, now Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, will lose a significant boost to their benefits that was part of the stimulus. We're going to feel it big time in New York. We will not only lose the dollars, but we will lose a related number of jobs. You will feel it here in Santa Fe, unless we're able somehow or other to find resources to turn this around. Don't let it happen that on top of that loss, we then turn around and remove people from the SNAP program through the various propositions that are now in front of Congress. If you want details on both what's being proposed and strategies for addressing it, there is a website called the Hunger Cliff, and you can just, if you Google Hunger Cliff, it will take you to that website. In the long run, however, the answer is not bigger, better food programs. Okay, the answer is bigger, better jobs and a decent incomes policy for people who cannot or should not work. And so I want to conclude with one idea from my little food policy center. We have just issued a report called the Good Food Jobs Report. And what we did was try to address the massive shortfall in jobs. And as you know, there's no shortage of work that needs to be done. There's just not an adequate number of jobs. We need to invest in the work that needs to be done and create the jobs. But we wanted to create jobs that not only were good jobs, meaning they paid a living wage and had protections and benefits, but that also simultaneously contributed to making better food, healthier food, available to more people in our city. And I'll give you just one example, but we had a dozen or so strategies. One example was the proposal to train home health care workers so that they could be skilled shoppers and food preparers for people with diet-related diseases. In New York, that's overwhelmingly diabetes. And so to upgrade the skills, making the home health care workers more skilled and therefore have higher salary potential, and at the same time equip them to provide healthier food for the people under their care. Again, if you will go to www.nycfoodpolicy.org, you can get our full list of strategies. Some of them wouldn't fit in Santa Fe, but many of them might be useful and would enrich your process there. We have become a more unequal society than we have been since the eve of the Great Depression. And so I've made a sort of commitment that in all the talking I do, most of which lately is about school food, but not all of it, I have to conclude by saying we also need to pay attention in this country to campaign finance reform, because our mounting inequality has concentrated wealth and therefore power, because of the extraordinary influence of money in our politics, concentrated power in the hands of people who are exempt from the challenges that most of us face. You know, they live in gated communities, they don't have to worry about the quality of the municipal services. They send their kids to private institutions, they are not so worried about the quality of our schools. They purchase individualized solutions to the problems that are challenges for the rest of us. And with the degree of inequality we have, we need to put limits on the power of the people with the most money, and we need to do that through changing our campaign finance laws. So I hope I haven't taken you too far from the food policy issue.
Yes, I agree with everything and second it. And some good ideas, I think, to add into our food plan as well. So thank you very much, Jan.